5 a.m., North Seattle, Washington. A freezing pre-dawn haze clung to the rooftops, the streetlights still glowing like dying embers. 22 kilograms of heroin, a federal stack moving into position. FBI and ICE converging on a quiet residential block. A secret operating room hidden in plain sight. A narcotics pipeline running straight through one of Seattle's most respected medical institutions. This was the moment everything finally collapsed. 50 pounds of heroin, packed, sealed, and ready for distribution, waiting in the basement of a man the city trusted. A man whose name was spoken with respect at hospital fundraisers and medical symposiums. A man no one ever suspected. At 5:14 a.m., the eerie stillness of North Seattle shattered. A two-story suburban home, neat lawn, trimmed hedges, Christmas lights still tangled along the gutter, exploded inward as a federal battering ram tore the front door from its hinges. The house belonged to Dr. Lawrence Whitlock, age 56, a polished, confident hospital director whose reputation had been built on decades of public trust. The first rooms looked exactly as expected. Family pictures smiling from hallway walls, framed degrees from prestigious universities, polished hardwood floors. A lifetime curated to appear wholesome and untouchable. But the truth waited downstairs. The basement door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. As agents stepped into the cold, stale air below, the illusion of a respectable life evaporated. 50 pounds of heroin stacked beside a reinforced weapons cache. Short-barreled rifles, custom-modified pistols, boxes of ammunition with cartel markings scorched into the wood. It was the kind of arsenal meant for enforcement, intimidation, and war. And then they found the room. Behind a concealed wall panel lay a fully equipped clandestine surgical suite. Stainless steel operating tables, bright overhead lights, rows of glinting medical instruments arranged with obsessive precision. It was the kind of operating room meant for life-saving procedures, twisted instead into a place where Whitlock blurred the line between medicine and organized crime. A man sworn to heal had transformed his own home into a cartel satellite, trading his oath for money, leverage, and power. The deeper investigators pushed, the faster Whitlock's carefully curated persona unraveled. For years, he posed as the polished face of Seattle's healthcare leadership. Speeches, charity galas, promising new community initiatives. But underneath it all was a criminal network few agents had ever witnessed. Federal forensic teams uncovered 23 shell companies scattered across Nevada, Belize, and Panama. No offices, no employees, no legitimate operations, yet millions flowed through them, hidden inside fake medical procurement fees, fraudulent grants, and humanitarian payments routed from intermediaries in Venezuela and Mexico. Whitlock's position inside Seattle's hospital system granted him access criminals could only dream of. Through charity programs, donor drives, and specialized partnerships, he quietly manipulated inspectors, city officials, regional administrators, anyone whose signature opened doors or erased obstacles. Encrypted emails recovered from Whitlock's hidden workstation revealed chilling coded instructions. Move the patients tonight. Border team ready. Messages investigators later confirmed referred to human trafficking victims disguised as medical transfers. The breaking point came when agents found a folder labeled simply "Logistics." Inside, transport schedules for 9 kidnapped individuals, complete with falsified medical documentation and projected exploitation value. Alongside the schedules, a ledger outlining a massive narcotic shipment. 1 ton of heroin, 1.5 tons of methamphetamine and fentanyl, mapped meticulously through Washington's ferry system before dawn. By the time agents connected the final fragments of the investigation, the truth had hardened into something undeniable. Every ledger, every encrypted message, every falsified medical form pointed in one direction. Whitlock was not a passive figure caught in the machinery. He was not someone coerced or misled. He was the machinery, the central axis around which an entire cartel pipeline rotated. A network that weaponized medical authority to transport drugs, organs, and human beings across the Pacific Northwest with chilling, almost clinical precision. And as agents stared at the latest intel feed, they realized something far worse. The next shipment wasn't scheduled. It was already moving, already loaded, already en route toward the water. What they had uncovered was not a doctor corrupted by criminals. It was a criminal empire hiding inside a doctor. A man who had turned sterile hallways and surgical privileges into corridors for trafficking. A man who could sign a form and open a smuggling route. A man whose white coat wasn't a symbol of healing anymore, but a perfect disguise. If you believe power like that should never hide behind a hospital badge, then share this story. More people need to see what was really happening behind the scenes. By 3:40 a.m., federal commanders knew the window had closed. The intel package wasn't a puzzle anymore. It had become a countdown. 9 kidnapped victims were being held inside a cartel-controlled warehouse near the Everett waterfront. At the same time, a convoy loaded with 1 ton of heroin and another 1.5 tons of meth and fentanyl was preparing to move before the first hint of sunrise. Inside the Joint Operations Center, tension hung in the air so thick it felt metallic. Screens flickered with satellite imagery, thermal traces, and route projections. Maps were covered in red-marked choke points and fallback positions. Every data point led to the same conclusion. The cartel wasn't planning to run. They were planning to fight. Hard. They were heavily armed, dug in, and ready to defend the warehouse to the last man. The mission's classification shifted instantly. This was no longer a narcotics interdiction. It became a high-risk hostage rescue. FBI teams, HRT operators, DEA tactical units, ICE HSI strike squads. A unified formation moving with one objective: save the victims before they vanished forever. No speeches, no adrenaline speeches, just the quiet, ritualistic clicks of weapons being chamber-checked, straps tightened, radios tuned, gloves adjusted. Final nods passed silently from one operator to another as the convoy of unmarked SUVs rolled into the night. As the vehicles approached Everett, the first warning sign appeared like an omen. Shadows on the rooftops, human silhouettes poised against the dim pre-dawn sky. Spotters, riflemen. The cartel had eyes everywhere, scanning the quiet road below. They were expecting someone to come. They just had no idea who was coming. The assault ignited with a shockwave that ripped through the harbor like lightning striking metal. A breaching charge detonated against the warehouse's eastern wall, peeling the steel skin open and showering sparks across the loading bay. Almost instantly, gunfire exploded from inside, a violent, suffocating roar that filled the air as bullets slammed into concrete barriers and tore through support beams. The interior of the warehouse wasn't a storage area anymore. It was a fortress. Firing ports cut into sheet metal, catwalks reinforced with welded braces, corners angled for kill zones, a labyrinth designed to trap intruders. From above, a gunman appeared on a catwalk, raising a scoped rifle. Before he could steady his aim, an FBI sniper fired through a shattered skylight, dropping him where he stood. Inside, federal teams pushed forward through a maze of overturned forklifts, chained together as barricades. Chemical drums stacked into bunkers, ladders leading to elevated firing positions. Dark alcoves where cartel shooters waited in ambush. The air was thick with smoke, dust, cordite, and the sharp scent of oil. At one point, 2 gunmen burst from behind a row of crates, forcing HRT operators into brutal close-quarters combat. Shields slammed forward, muzzle flashes blasted inches from helmets. Echoing footsteps and shouted commands bounced off the steel rafters. A flashbang rolling under a conveyor belt erupted in a blinding white burst that rattled the entire structure. On the southwest side of the building, ICE agents intercepted a group of traffickers attempting to force the hostages onto a refrigerated truck. A gunman swung around a pallet stack and opened fire. Before he could squeeze off a second burst, a K9 unit lunged forward, slamming him to the ground with bone-cracking force. The hostages scrambled back into cover as officers secured the area. Outside, the most dangerous moment of the night erupted in seconds, a sudden shift from controlled chaos to raw survival. 3 cartel trucks roared to life at once, their engines screaming like wounded animals as the drivers slammed the accelerators to the floor, desperate to punch through the collapsing perimeter. The first truck tore forward with enough force to rattle nearby windows, its headlights slicing through the haze as it barreled straight into a chain-link gate. Metal shrieked and twisted, sparks flying in a shower that lit the wet pavement orange and white. The impact sent the gate skidding across the ground like a discarded toy. A DEA armored vehicle reacted instantly, tires screeching as it veered sideways, blocking the escape path with a wall of steel. The cartel truck tried to swerve, but momentum took over. It slammed into a row of stacked cargo containers so brutally that the entire line shuddered from bottom to top. The other two trucks jerked back, trying to reverse, but it was too late. The net had already closed. Above the battlefield, a helicopter's spotlight snapped alive and cut through the darkness in a blinding cone of white. The entire dock lit up like a theater stage. Every fleeing silhouette, every discarded rifle, every overturned crate suddenly exposed. The beams swung across the warehouse roof, the loading platforms, the maze of containers, revealing the frantic, unraveling remnants of a criminal empire collapsing under its own weight. Back inside the warehouse, FBI operators moved with methodical speed toward the container repeatedly referenced in Whitlock's encrypted messages. The metal door loomed ahead, industrial grade, reinforced, the kind used for high-security military cargo. The first attempt with a bolt cutter snapped the blades clean off. The second cut bit into the steel with a harsh scream that echoed across the chamber. Finally, the lock cracked, the hinges groaned, and the doors swung open. Inside, 9 hostages stared out of the darkness, faces pale, eyes wide, bodies shaking from cold and terror. They were bound, bruised, freezing, but breathing, alive. Every one of them alive. Outside, the final gunshots dwindled to silence. The last armed man emerged from behind a toppled pallet tower, fingers trembling as he tossed his rifle to the ground and raised both hands high. Agents moved in fast, surrounding him as he collapsed to his knees. The battle was over. By the time the sun lifted over Everett's Port, the full scale of the operation was almost surreal. 2.5 tons of narcotics seized, dozens of weapons recovered, 9 lives saved from a fate most would never have escaped. A sprawling criminal network shattered. And in the middle of it all, the agents, dust-covered, sweat-soaked, breathing hard through the smoke, stood, knowing they had survived one of the most dangerous close-quarters engagements to unfold on American soil in years. As dawn broke over the Everett waterfront and the final cartel gunman was taken into custody, federal analysts didn't waste a minute. They turned immediately to the staggering mountain of evidence extracted from Dr. Lawrence Whitlock's hidden empire. What they uncovered in the hours that followed wasn't merely corruption. It wasn't the work of one rogue doctor or a small trafficking cell. It was a blueprint, a deeply rooted web of influence woven directly into Seattle's civic and medical framework, operating silently and efficiently for years. In the FBI evidence room, rows of laptops, encrypted phones, falsified patient files, financial ledgers, and donation records were laid out under unforgiving fluorescent light. Patterns surfaced almost instantly. Whitlock hadn't acted alone. He had quietly cultivated a ring of protection made up of people whose names carried authority, favors traded as grants, partnerships that appeared philanthropic, connections disguised as professional collaboration. All of it looked legitimate until the money trail revealed the truth. Emails, wire logs, and coded memos exposed ties between Whitlock and 20 public officials across Washington state. On paper, these individuals appeared to perform routine duties, nothing more. But the documents told a different story. A deputy sheriff receiving recurring payments labeled as security consulting. A city health inspector whose approval stamps aligned perfectly with incoming cartel shipments. A port employee who repeatedly signed off on refrigerated containers without conducting inspections. And even more damning, a second surgeon from a neighboring hospital appeared in encrypted message logs discussing special transfers and post-procedure compensation that had nothing to do with actual medicine. Separately, each transaction was small enough to avoid attention, but over 5 years, they added up to $37.9 million. Money funneled through Whitlock's medical donation initiatives, corrupted programs masquerading as charity. These weren't clerical errors or accounting oversights. These were deliberate, coordinated decisions made by individuals who fully understood what their silence enabled. When the news broke, Seattle residents were stunned into silence. Many remembered sitting in crowded auditoriums listening to Whitlock's polished speeches about public health and community trust. Parents recalled watching him hand out scholarships with a reassuring smile. Local papers had printed glowing profiles about his commitment to charity, innovation, and patient care. But behind that carefully polished image, behind the white coat, the awards, the public applause, stood a man who had secretly weaponized his authority to hide a cartel pipeline moving narcotics, human beings, and even harvested organs through the Pacific Northwest. Inside city offices, the shock didn't just spread, it detonated. Emergency meetings erupted across departments. Supervisors demanded immediate audits. Hospital executives tore into years of archived contracts, surgical partnerships, and donor records linked to Whitlock. Port authorities faced reporters and regulators they were utterly unprepared for. And in community halls across Seattle, especially among older generations who had survived decades of social and political upheaval, a deeper, more personal fear surfaced. If someone like Whitlock, a hospital director, a public figure, a trusted steward of health, could be part of something so monstrous, then who else in their city had already sold their responsibility? The betrayal wasn't philosophical. It wasn't hypothetical. It was written into signatures that greenlit suspicious transfers. It was hidden in inspection stamps added without reading. It was sealed inside containers waved through checkpoints without a glance. It lived in every moment where a life could have been saved, but wasn't. And when federal agents finally arrested Whitlock, the community had to confront a truth more devastating than the raid itself. The danger had not arrived from distant borders or external threats. It had grown steadily inside their own institutions, under fluorescent lights, behind desks, beneath official titles, quiet, patient, undetected. By the end of the week, what had begun as a quiet pre-dawn breach in North Seattle had evolved into one of the most sweeping corruption and trafficking cases in Washington state's recent memory. Federal situation rooms from Tacoma to Washington, D.C. no longer displayed scattered theories or fragmented leads. Instead, massive digital boards illuminated a complete, horrifying blueprint of a criminal machine operating under the cover of medicine, public service, philanthropy, and civic trust. And every thread in that blueprint traced back to one man, Dr. Lawrence Whitlock, and his long, calculated betrayal of the system he was sworn to protect. The final inventory from the Everett Port operation was staggering. Agents logged 2.5 tons of narcotics, 1 ton of heroin, and 1.5 tons of methamphetamine and fentanyl, packed and sealed inside industrial containers marked for transport. Nearby, 324 weapons were recovered, ranging from compact pistols with filed serial numbers to modified assault rifles hidden in duffel bags. Bundles of cash, gold certificates, offshore financial documents, and laundering ledgers totaled more than $52 million, intercepted before they could vanish into the cartel's global accounts. But the most important count didn't come from drugs, money, or firearms. It came from 9 rescued hostages, shivering and traumatized, transported under armed escort to the University of Washington Medical Center for emergency treatment. Their survival turned an already massive case into something far more personal for every agent involved. As evidence poured into federal labs, prosecutors began assembling a list of charges so extensive that Whitlock's legal team could barely process the volume. By the time the first round of indictments was unsealed, a total of 31 individuals had been charged. Among them were cartel enforcers, transport coordinators, traffickers, logistics brokers, and, most devastating of all, public employees who had knowingly facilitated Whitlock's network from the inside. Each indictment was supported by uncompromising documentation. Signatures confirming cargo, wire transfers masked as medical donations, inspection logs matching cartel schedules down to the hour, encrypted messages outlining routes and patient transfers. Nothing was speculative, nothing was assumed. Every charge came with a stack of proof thick enough to crush any claim of innocence. Whitlock himself faced the full weight of federal law. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, conspiracy, financial crimes, illegal organ transport, public corruption. His arraignment drew such a massive crowd that U.S. Marshals were forced to clear the courthouse steps. Older residents, the ones who had trusted his hospital, voted for officials tied to his network or relied on his public health guidance, stood behind barricades, some in tears, others staring blankly, unable to reconcile the man they once admired with the monster described in the indictment. Inside the city's institutions, shockwaves did not simply spread. They tore through the system like a pressure wave moving down a concrete corridor. Hallways that usually echoed with routine chatter now felt tense and hollow. Hospital administrators were among the first to react. launching emergency audits that reached into every corner of their operations. Transplant logs were pulled. Donor records were sifted through line by line. Decades of surgical program files were yanked from cold archives, their folders stacked in frantic towers on conference tables that had never seen such urgency. At the port, terminals that normally buzzed with forklifts and cargo alarms went silent. Entire sections were shut down as teams moved methodically through containers, manifests, inspection logs, and access records. Police departments across the region scrambled to contain the fallout. Internal affairs units opened investigations into officers whose names had surfaced in encrypted messages. Patrol shifts were reshuffled. Commanders demanded explanations they knew they wouldn't receive. In Olympia, the reaction was volcanic. State legislators, blindsided and embarrassed, demanded immediate hearings to expose the oversight gaps that had allowed a hospital director, someone seen as a guardian of public welfare, to operate a trafficking hub under the facade of community service. There was anger, disbelief, and something far more corrosive: shame. For everyday Seattle residents, especially older Americans who had spent lifetimes believing in the sanctity of institutions, the revelation hit a raw nerve. It wasn't just Whitlock's crimes that hurt them. It was the realization that these crimes had grown in silence, nourished by years of trust, deference, and blind faith in systems that had quietly failed them. People who had trusted doctors, inspectors, administrators, and public servants now found themselves questioning how long subtle warnings had been ignored, dismissed, or politely explained away. Yet as the shock rippled outward, as grief mixed with disbelief, another truth began to surface, slower, quieter, but far more unnerving. The machine Whitlock built had not collapsed. The system had bent, but it had not broken. Full network revealed. When the threat finally emerged into daylight, it wasn't institutions that saved the city, it was individuals. Federal agents stepped in without hesitation. Analysts traced every hidden dollar, every forged signature, every masked transaction. Tactical teams risked their lives in close-quarters gunfights to pull 9 strangers out of a steel container in the dead of night. And the law, wounded, shaken, but still intact, held firm enough to bring the entire network crashing down. Whitlock's courtroom now sits empty. His nameplate still rests, untouched, on the desk. The flags still stand upright. The judge's bench gleams with its usual polish. But the silence inside that room carries a weight every Seattle resident can feel. A reminder that sometimes justice must turn against those who were entrusted to uphold it. And as the city absorbed the full extent of Whitlock's betrayal, one understanding settled over Seattle like an unwelcome fog. Danger hadn't crept in from dark alleys or foreign borders. It had thrived under fluorescent lights. It had worn badges, held titles, processed paperwork, attended charity dinners, smiled for photographs. It had grown in offices meant to protect, and served quietly behind the very symbols people trusted most. But once exposed, it could no longer hide. In the end, this case was never just about one doctor, one basement, or one warehouse raid on the Everett waterfront. It was about what happens when individuals entrusted to safeguard lives choose power over integrity and influence over humanity. When a respected title becomes the perfect mask for something predatory, Seattle learned a painful truth this week. Danger does not always come from shadows. Sometimes it walks the halls of hospitals. Sometimes it signs official forms. Sometimes it shakes hands at charity events and smiles for cameras. And yet, this story revealed something equally important. When the system stumbled, people, real people, did not. Federal agents stepped forward. Analysts followed every number. Rescue teams risked everything for 9 strangers whose names they didn't know. Justice moved. Maybe slow, maybe bruised, maybe exhausted, but still moving, still alive, still unbroken. If you believe accountability must reach everyone, regardless of title or reputation, then share this story, raise your voice, and remember one word: justice.